Yeah, so we switch gears a little bit and look at the question that has been kind of around for a while in YWAM, about like who is a YWAMer, or like somebody said in the survey forms, it's maybe better to ask like what is a YWAMer. Anyway, so let's unpack that a little bit in this about 45-minute time slot we have, 45-50, just to continue this kind of journey of defining for ourselves, also in Europe, how do we really look at this question, this matter, like who is kind of part of YWAM, who isn't. So let me just give you a little bit of background to this question and some of the things that have contributed to this discussion just this recent year or so. So YWAM's calling includes discipling nations. And again, for most people who maybe just joined for a DTS, that might not be the first thing they would think of. Of course, they think of how they grow in knowing God more and how they can make him known. But already pretty soon, when we get the biblical worldview teaching and we get to understand, that God's desire is to see his lordship increase in every area of life, we recognize, yes, this is part of our big mandate, to see communities and nations transformed. So, and our UFN was specifically designed to equip people to work in those 7 spheres. So it is really an integral part of our calling to disciple nations. Hundreds of thousands who've gone through our DTSs over the past 50 years have been infected with our DNA. This is something that Patrick Dixon said a few years ago in one of our meetings in the Netherlands, and he said, this is one of your wonderful missions, to infect, the word is of course negative, but to infect as many people as you can with your DNA. And that includes, loving God, loving our neighbor, seeing our world transformed for the sake of Christ. But anyway, so many people have been infected, and they believe, hopefully, those DTS graduates, that their lives really count for God, and also count for their world. So they're salt and light in their workplace, in their neighborhoods, in their local church, and some are serving in other mission organizations. I meet many people in other mission organizations that were trained in YWAM. So that's also part of our inheritance, maybe in that sense. Some DTS graduates very purposefully see their mission field in society, whether in politics, business, healthcare, education. These domains have often or somehow felt like separate from the typical kind of YWAM mainstream kind of work, which is more like in the sphere of church. But some people who have gone through our schools or have staffed with us very purposefully and intentionally have moved into spheres, into impacting those spheres. And some YWAM ministries are good at connecting with people who are active in those spheres. There are some bases or some YWAM teams who have that understanding and see that as part of their calling. But many don't, really, if I think of how we operate also in Europe. Some, not all of these people, continue to see themselves as YWAMers, and for sure YWAMers at heart. But because their time with YWAM, whether it was just their DTS or maybe staffing for a while, was so formative in their spiritual development. It was like a pivotal time. So they will always have that loyalty to us as a mission, even though they might have moved on into the next season of their life and career. Most of YWAM as we know it doesn't really see these missionaries in society as part of our movement. I mean, we love them, we respect them, we support them, but we don't necessarily consider them part of us. We consider DTS graduates like alumni, and yes, some ministries again, have recognized the value of keeping in touch and giving something to these marketplace missionaries, and that's often in a relational capacity. Two recent developments, I think, or input pieces in YWAM have made us really rethink what it means to be a YWAMer and how inclusive we need to approach this question. And one of these was in a document that was distributed in May last year by our founders circle. There was like a revised foundational values document in May 2020, and there was for the first time in my life, in YWAM at least, I saw there was a definition of what a YWAMer is. So I don't know if that could be actually put on the screen, if there is one, and otherwise I'll for sure read it out to you. A YWAMer is someone who has completed, a YWAMer is someone who has completed a YWAM DTS and who joyfully embraces our statement of purpose, core beliefs, foundational values, our 4 legacy words and covenants. So it's interesting where it says a YWAMer is, if you've done like inductive Bible study, you also notice where it says is, then there's probably some sort of definition or explanation. So again, this is one of the kind of the definitions that was given to us by our founders, as they had also revamped some of our foundational values and some edits in our statement of purpose, etc. So this is definitely one of the things that made me think like, okay, we have this definition now. What do we do with it? Then another, I think, key element that was presented to us was in Tom Bloomer's words a year ago on pruning. And I remember as a field circle team, we invited Tom Bloomer to spend some time with us, because what was out there initially just on paper, well, on the internet, caused me to ask many questions, and some of us felt like we need to talk to Tom to kind of really hear what is in his heart, what is he really saying. And he talked about pruning, he talked about fruitfulness, but he also talked about our call to disciple nations. And he said, we as YWAM are pretty good at discipling individuals. We've learned to do this at our bases, in our teams, but we are not really discipling nations. And it was like, okay, it made, I think, many of us realize, well, are we indeed really involved in discipling nations? Yes, good at discipling individuals, but not really that good, maybe, or that engaged, in the spheres. Also, the term YWAM 3.0 was coined, and also that came from Tom Bloomer, as he has been very much involved in the U of N and is somehow seeing some development in the U of N. He also, kind of translated that to where we are at as YWAM. So so the term 3.0, YWAM 3.0 was coined in that context as well. So many of us sense that God is challenging us to include the spheres more in our scope of ministry and vision. So there is like a nudging to move more to include that in our scope. This also makes room for more YWAMers to engage in the spheres. If we sense a yes, we need to make more room for that towards the spheres. But how should we view those working in the spheres? That's of course a big question. Are they YWAMers? And if so, what makes them a YWAMer? Should there be any requirements, any kind of non-negotiables we feel like, like the Council of Jerusalem initially kind of sorting out, what would the Gentiles need to do in order to be considered Christians? should there be any wisdom there, to approach people working in the spheres, as far as from our perspective, from YWAM, the movement, as we understand how we operate. Anyways, a lot to be said about this subject. Let's just have a poll, and I'd just be interested to have a few quick answers from you, relating, of course, to this subject. And I don't know if you can get the poll up. There are a couple of brief questions. Is this matter? Need for clarification of who is a YWAMer? Is it relevant to you? Do you share this sense that we are to move, that we are to be more involved in the spheres? Do you personally know people who fit in this category, that work in the spheres and are interested actually in linking more with YWAM? And is there any ministry who is actively networking with alumni, or as also Darlene would call them, marketplace missionaries? So if you could just take a moment just to give your yes, no, not sure, and we see what the overall kind of picture is from about 100 of us here in this meeting. I see Dave Stabler, you're also asking the question if our international leaders indeed wanted to intentionally define what a YWAMer is. The very reason this was in the document, to me, says yes, they wanted to give some definition. But that definition, while this is helpful on the one hand, of course, also creates some other good questions. And it's very good. If you look at this definition, you wonder if all YWAMers in our movement or organization, if they really can say wholeheartedly yes to that definition, even for themselves. So, okay, I see the results here. So, is this matter relevant to you in your YWAM situation? Well, this is like at least 3/4 who says yes. So this is a question apparently that is important for us to find some answers for, or have some more definition. Also going to and the no's, that might also depend on maybe the nation you're working in. Of course, some of our works in YWAM Europe are like 50 years old, and some of them are maybe 10 years old or 5 years old, and you might not yet be maybe dealing even with like thousands of alumni who, of some of them are very active in the spheres and some aren't. But very good. The second question: do you share the sense that we are to be more involved? That's really clear that we feel that yes, there is more to be done in this whole realm of the spheres, influencing the spheres, impacting. We personally know people who fit in this category. I'm also quite surprised, and yet not, that because we are very relational, we have met between us as leaders in this room. We've met, of course, with thousands, literally, of people who have done DTS, who've staffed with us, and who are active in their cities or in their own networks, and trying to influence. So that's also about the 77%. And then about half of you are aware of some ministries that have this as a very intentional element of their work, connecting with those alumni or the marketplace missionaries. And it's interesting, here in the Netherlands there's also a new initiative. It's called U-Turn, also really trying to connect with DTS graduates and helping them to form small circles in cities, and have them pray together and reach out really with the gospel in their sphere of influence. Well, thank you all for participating in this poll. I think when we look at us and them, which hopefully at some point we have an understanding that they can be maybe more part of us, they, the people who are working in the spheres, who kind of want to be connected, maybe for different reasons, with us as a mission. I think it's really interesting to try to think through, what would be our in our interest, to establish relationship with those marketplace missionaries. What is in our interest as a movement, as an organization? What could benefit us, but also really, if they are doing the work of influencing the spheres, is there any specific interest they might have in linking with YWAM? What are they longing for? When they look at us as a mission, what could be their benefit of reaching out to YWAM and investing a little bit of effort in a connection with us as YWAM? So these are, I think, very important questions to think about in order to understand, is there like a common interest, like a shared interest, that makes us really want to establish maybe a fresh kind of connection, and maybe create a new category, maybe think through how can we do this, and is there one size fits all, or do we really need to look more at the regions, areas, nations in Europe, and maybe have different ideas to work on this. I think it's important we just really have some time to talk about this in smaller groups, which we will be breaking into in a few moments. Again, I want to say thank you to all those that have already answered some of the questions in the survey. I've been printing it all, and I'm still kind of going through it, and there's lots of wisdom there, and some really good ideas, and some concerns which also are important for us to be aware of. And again, this is a bit of a journey for us to come to some sort of conclusion or tentative kind of idea how we want to, maybe later in the year, maybe in October, when we meet in Lviv, how we can kind of bring some sort of closure to this this discovery journey about this question. So we will have a couple of questions. Is it possible to share those, Tove? Oh, there they are. You might want to take a picture of it if you're afraid that you lose them once we. Yep. Once we.
So they are actually available in the room. So they'll be in the chat in the room. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw them in the chat. Okay, they're also available then as we break out. So some of the questions, and you can just pick 1, 2, or 3, however many you feel you want to discuss together or pray about. What are some key questions that need clarification? Again, we are looking for answers eventually, but sometimes we need to first know the questions in order to seek for the right answer. Are there any helpful metaphors that can help us understand or define this matter? There might be models that you see, or there might be, I know some would say you have to, like the church and the para-church organizations and whatnot. So there could be maybe a model that you could think of. What does being inclusive look like in this matter? I mean, how far we are an inclusive mission? We are a movement, not very structured, not like top down. No, so there's lots of freedom. It's very inclusive. But is there an end to that somehow when we consider this matter? Yes or no? And then what are some of the elements we need to be considering to say, hey, if this applies to you, you are counted in. How could you see a network or networks develop? Should that be a structure separate from YWAM, or as we know it? Should there be leadership in such network? These are all questions for us to struggle with, and what do you perceive God is saying? You might want to pray together, or you might already have done it and have a sense of these things. So we will divide up for like 20 minutes. We will divide up in groups of 5, approximately 5. And if one of you could be a scribe of the things that you believe are kind of surfacing in your group, that would be very valuable. We won't have time in our plenary session after the breakout time to share the feedback. But we would appreciate it if you could just write it out and email it, and later we'll give you an email address where you can send that to, for like a smaller task force to continue to struggle with this very interesting question. So we'll come back after 20 minutes, and then Tove and I will also just share a few more thoughts in closing for this particular topic for this morning. So hope you have a good time. And again, maybe one could facilitate your group process a little bit, and somebody else could write some notes. Enjoy and get to know some new people. If you haven't met them, introduce yourself briefly. That would be wonderful. Okay, welcome back to our large plenary room. We are, I think, with about 100 altogether. I see 83 connections, probably with about 100 in the room. Yeah, we could have used a lot more time. I think one of the last questions one of our group members had was, some nations have very clear kind of structures, and it is clear kind of, yeah, in that sense also who has some authority to make those maybe kind of calls, who's in and who is not in. But some other nations might not have that kind of structure, and so you deal with completely different dynamics. So that's just one aspect of this whole discussion. Indeed, is there anything we do even want to control as YWAM? Do we want to be exclusive and control, or do we want to be inclusive and just release? And then there's that tension. How far is there actually somebody who can say, "Hey, stop! Oh no, that's not possible. You cannot speak on behalf of YWAM," in that kind of role and capacity. So these are super good questions to ask and try to find answers to. Of course, these days, as we have also been preparing for our session today, of course, our minds, like with Tove and Belinda and I, our minds are just going like overdrive. And even this morning, I was laying awake, just struggling to find, maybe ways that could help us to facilitate this probably growing number of people who are working in the spheres and who desire, who want to be connected somehow with us, because of who we are and what we can give to them. And I think vice versa, from us as an organization movement, we would want to connect to them as well, because they do something that we are not doing. And if we somehow can see them as one of us, we all of a sudden feel engaged as well in and involved in some of the things that they are doing for the kingdom of God. And yet in a different setting, different context, they have their own maybe leadership structures that they are accountable to, etc. And so as I was just laying awake and thinking it over yet another time, I thought, of something that maybe could be something to to further explore in the future. And I think that Tove had similar thoughts, and this would be maybe to think of YWAM as we know it at the moment, whether you say that's an organization, or in a way YWAM as we know it already really is a movement, because of its nature and how we operate. But then all those DTS graduates who are called into the spheres, who are working maybe in local churches, or maybe running their own organizations, could we form networks you know, YWAM networks with those people. And of course, you know, one of the keywords in a network is that there's an interconnectedness. So they're not like all like on their own, but there's some sort of relationship, communication, linking. Um, so so to see YWAM, you know, as a movement, and then have YWAM networks. But again, it's just creating an understanding with a terminology, with a concept that could be helpful in the future for us in YWAM, you know, to see how can we partner more and link more with the people, you know, who are being disciples of nations. Tove, could you
Yeah.
add some of your perspectives to this?
Yes, so we have had this conversation now go on for some time. I'll just share a screen here. Okay, so maybe you recognize this, that this was, I think it was David Hamilton that put something together for a meeting in Thailand quite some years ago now. And he said a movement.
2.5, yeah.
2.5, oh, I thought it was longer. Okay, 2.5 years ago. That keys to a movement. So to YWAM as we know it, that's a common agenda, common standard and measurements, clear way to everyone to contribute, continuous information, backbone organization, you know, it was that, okay, that's some of the aspects for a movement. And then we started looking at, so how do we measure progress? And one would be themes, another one spheres, and all of that into all geographical areas. So that's including all peoples. So it's just a bit of a grid to how to talk about it. So in our conversation now, I'm sorry, going a bit fast here. I have a few minutes. It is like we have two different categories. We have one that we are operating in the ecclesiastical structure, so in the church sphere that we are part of. And here, some people can choose to be part-time with us. They can give some hours a week or a month, you know, to tap into being part of reaching these themes that was also mentioned in Thailand. All these themes, they have a finish line that was kind of to see an established and growing church in all nations, in all peoples, and so on. And then you have two other areas that are more supportive, I guess you can say, to see these finish lines come through. On the other side, over here, you have all the spheres, and we keep talking about them, but wrestle with how do we really integrate it all and really be effective there as well. So that's spheres, and of course we have YWAM that will link up to them, like we have every college is basically linking up to one of the spheres. Now, if we then imagine that within ecclesiastical church structure, you know, sorry, that's this one. Here we could link up, let's say if it's YWAM in the center, let's just say this is YWAM. Not that we are the center of the universe, but we are talking about our movement. If you then imagine that those themes working very much with evangelism, other people that are part-time, they can tap into that and come alongside, you know, and we're just expanding that. And you could call these leaders for these areas. That could be on bases on in nations, wherever. So again, all of these are these finish lines that David Hamilton talked about, and then these are supportive. And this other circle out here, that could be other networks in our nations. It's not all about YWAM, right? So we are networking with all kinds of networks in our nations, or I think we should be. So not to just be YWAM centric, you know, but establish all these networks, be a part of it, you know, these networks to effectively reach these finish lines. But then we have this other side, the sphere side. What if, and I put the spheres in the middle, it's all for Jesus and by Jesus. And I think that could be also linked out maybe from our university, but not necessarily just YWAM, but it's people that are really strong in these areas that are linking outwardly. If you imagine then these stars being the network leaders, here we could call it network. We are networking again with other non-YWAM networks, but let's say I'll get back to this. If you take this one, okay, so you can have Adam. Adam, he has done a DTS and he's done further studies with YWAMer and other universities. He has a biblical and sphere envision both from YWAMer and YWAM, and he works within the economic realm of economics. He serve and empower the poor. I mean, he has a calling. That's his drive. So that guy, he's fully envisioned. He is embedded or used to be in YWAM, but envisioned by YWAM. So he could be a network facilitator or convener. Then we have Joe. He's done a DTS. He studied to become a banker, trying to be a good Christian witness. Like any other Christian, he's not envisioned for the actual work he does necessarily. At least he may not have started the biblical values on economics. He's not much different than a mainstream banker, apart from he's done a DTS and he's a Christian. He could join this sphere if he wanted to. And hopefully he could be envisioned for the work he's actually doing. He could come alive and then, become more effective in the actual work he does. Or he could, if he's passionate about evangelism or something else, he could be a part of a theme in a way, if he wanted to, or just be a regular Christian going to church. So that was some of the areas we were playing a little bit with. These are networks. You could have networks in each one of these. It will be strongly, most likely, linked to YWAMer. And here, you would probably have the network leader, or that is more closer linked into also YWAM. That would serve another purpose that we have acknowledged with University of the Nations, that we do miss some links between people do a DTS. Many don't hear too much about YWAMer courses. Some do, and then they leave, maybe with a degree or not, and then we don't hear from them again, or they don't hear from us again. So with having these networks, we could link much closer with YWAMer graduates that can inform. It could be a blessing both ways. So that's some models that we are playing with. Yeah, I think that's enough from me.
Great. It's good to have some visuals and try to imagine, even if we think of networks, who could be involved, who could be invited. So should we have a convener? Indeed, if you need one person to invest in a team, even when you say there's no leader, you still need one person to invest to make it work. And if you think of networks, there has to be that interconnected element, even between that network and the rest of YWAM. So there's lots of things to think through. Thank you, Tove, for your also creative and innovative mind, and for helping us understand this better. Again, all your feedback from the processing group, please email that to Tove. I think Tove's email was in the chat. I don't have the chat open at the moment, but I think I'm sure it's somewhere there. Yeah, we need to bring closure to this subject, and we will continue to process this. Tove is chairing a small task force to look at all the feedback from you and to try work on some drafts or some proposal that we can have a look at later, just to answer the question, who's a YWAMer, and where we kind of draw some lines and how we can create maybe some structure to include those people in our life and in our work. So thank you, Tove, again, also for your thoughts on this.